I talk a lot about intentionality in my work, but I don't think in any of my videos I've ever really kind of deep dived and really explained what that word actually means to me. And it actually means the world to me. It's almost become like a guiding beacon. Um, because for me, intentionality is really just this: it's taking action with awareness. It's not just a nice concept for me anymore. It's a way of living. And honestly, it's one of the biggest things that's changed my life. I don't just do things anymore just automatically, not just going through life kind of half asleep. I don't just wait for things to get better. I don't just react, I don't just hope that life just somehow gets better on its own. But instead, I choose how I move through my life, with presence, with consciousness, and with care. And that's really a huge part of how I approach healing as well. So, welcome back to Next Level Pets, your home for living the best life you can with your pets and learning how to heal with purpose after they've left our lives. So, if you've ever loved an animal with your whole heart, then you belong here. And if this video resonates with you, please take a moment to like, subscribe, and leave a comment. Share your experience. It really helps these conversations reach more people who need support, understanding, and a more meaningful path through grief. And that's why when I talk about the Forever in Our Hearts program, I always describe it as a program of action. Because I don't believe that healing is just something that we should just sit around and wait for. I think healing is something that we can actually participate in. I think we can be mindful in how we heal. I think we can be intentional in how we grieve. And I think that we can actually take action with our pain, instead of just hoping that time does all the work for us. And I say this because, for a lot of my life, I didn't live that way. For a lot of my life, I think I was just kind of existing, not in a terrible way, but not, and not in a completely unconscious way, but definitely not in a deeply intentional way. I was doing what I needed to do, just kind of following whatever script, just kind of assuming that eventually if I kept going, something meaningful would happen, that eventually joy would come and appear in my days, and that eventually purpose would come. Eventually life would feel the way that I wanted it to feel. And I think a lot of people can hopefully relate to that. I think a lot of people live that way, just waiting for the horizon to give them something. And especially when you're hurting, especially when you're grieving, because when you're in pain, it's really easy to become passive. It's really easy to just wait. But when my cat Dublin was still with me, I had started to become more intentional with at least that part of my life, in regards to my relationship with him. I really didn't take, my love or our bond for him for granted. I was aware of how much I loved him, how much comfort he gave me, how special he was to me. And if you've ever had that kind of bond with an animal, it's different. It's just different. The relationship we have with animals is not the same as the kind of relationships that we share with people. It's its own kind of sacred relationship. There's a softness there, a trust, a rhythm, a companionship that really exists outside of the framework of language or normal human interactions. I didn't talk to friends or family or coworkers the way I talked to Dublin. I didn't laugh or play, regulate, comfort, or connect with people in the exact way that I did, same way I did with him. The human animal bond is its own incredibly unique and incredibly dynamic connection. And I was aware of that, at least while he was still with me. So I did try in the ways that I knew how at the time to be intentional with that love, to be present with him, to be grateful and thankful for this amazing furry little being, who is my family, because I know I loved him with awareness while he was here. But after I lost him, I think what I realized was I had not yet built enough intentionality into the rest of my life to understand how to survive and navigate the kind of pain I had after losing him. So I did what a lot of people do. I waited. I just waited to feel better. I waited to heal. I waited for time to somehow carry me into peace. And I think for a while I believed that if I just held on long enough, something would shift. that maybe healing was just somewhere out in the distance waiting for me, and I just hadn't reached it yet. And so I just hurt, and I kept hurting. And I think for a while, some part of me thought that the hurting itself meant I was honoring him in some way, like the pain was proof of the love. And I want to say that carefully because, in some ways that's true, but eventually I just got tired. I got tired of waiting. And I remember getting to this moment where I had to be really honest with myself. And the honest truth was, this is not helping me. The constant heaviness, the revolving door of sadness and guilt, the way of carrying and keeping Dublin only through suffering. And it wasn't helping me. And honestly, it wasn't honoring him the way I wanted it to. And that part hit me really hard because my love for him was beautiful. And, I just had this moment where I thought, I don't want the main thing left behind by this love to be just pain. I don't want suffering to be the final expression of how much I loved him. And that was the moment something changed. And I made a promise, and I made a promise to myself, and I made a promise to Dublin, that I was going to do something about it. I was going to stop waiting, stop just drifting along, stop hoping that healing would just eventually happen to me. So instead, I was going to participate in it. I was going to look for solutions. I was going to try. I was going to learn how to honor him, not only with pain, but with gratitude, with presence, with meaning, with joy. I made a promise that I was going to take action. I was going to look for what actually helps, what actually heals, what actually creates movement. I didn't know exactly what that was going to look like yet, but that didn't matter, because the first thing that changed my life was not having the perfect answer. It was just making the conscious decision that I was no longer going to stay passive in my grief. And honestly, that changed everything. Because once I started doing that, once I started taking intentional action, I found something that I wasn't even expecting to find. I was just looking for relief, and instead what I found was purpose. And that's really what I kind of want to communicate in this video, that once I started acting with intention, I also found purpose. And then purpose created more intentional action, and the two started feeding each other. And it became this really powerful and beautiful and motivating and fulfilling force in my life. Because suddenly my healing wasn't just about feeling less bad. It became about living differently, living more consciously, more awake, with just more meaning and intention. And now I try to bring that into everything, my health, my work, my relationships, how I spend my time, how I show up for people, how I take care of my responsibilities, just how I move through ordinary days to find meaning. Even really small things like, how late I stay up, how early I wake up, whether I return a phone call, whether I pay my bills on time, whether I show up for life, life's moments with obligation or with awareness. And one of the biggest things I've noticed is that whenever something feels annoying or heavy or like an obligation, if I pause and I actually bring my full attention to it, something shifts. And instead of resisting it, I ask, what would it look like to meet this intentionally? What action can I bring to this issue consciously? And almost every time the moment changes, the task changes, the energy changes, and I change. Because all of a sudden it's not just some random thing I have to do. Now it has meaning. Now it has purpose. Now it's become part of the life that I'm consciously building. And I think there's just something so subtle and so beautiful about that. And it's changed really how I see the world. It's changed how I move through the world. And honestly, it's changed how I live. And maybe that's kind of like the deeper truth underneath all of this, that healing didn't begin for me when enough time had passed. Healing began once I became intentional. Once I became intentional and I found purpose. And I don't say that lightly because I really do think that purpose came out of pain for me, not automatically, not magically, but through action, through trying, through paying attention, through experimenting, through asking what actually helps. Through all sorts of trial and error and research and kind of these do-it-yourself activities and practices that I was testing out, through slowly building things that created movement, meaning, and healing. And eventually, all of that, became the Forever in Our Hearts healing program that kind of helps provide a guided, action-based path to healing after the loss of a pet. But before it was a program, for me, it was just survival. And that has changed how I see life. It was me trying to figure out how to carry love without being destroyed by it. How to stay connected to Dublin without staying trapped in grief. How to make that love become something living again. And that process changed me. It's changed how I heal, how I love, how I grieve, just how I live. And maybe that is the deeper truth underneath everything I teach now, that healing doesn't always begin when the pain disappears. Sometimes healing begins the moment you decide to meet your pain with intention. And when you do that, you don't just only find healing, but, sometimes you find your purpose too. So thank you for watching this video. And if you have any comments to leave, about how intention plays a role in your life, the good and the bad, or anything related to your pets and any loss you may be experiencing, I look forward to hearing your comments or any questions you may have. Thank you so much.